Deutsche Welle. Living Planet.
This week on Living Planet, Spain promises to relax environmental laws to promote growth.
This is one of the city's gauges to check the quality of the air and measure pollution. Environmentalists worry that if the government has its way, the quality of air measured at stations such as this will be badly affected.
We hear from New Orleans, where BP may or may not face an enormous civil trial next week.
If industry-wide practices are not addressed, if regulation is not made more stringent, this could happen again. It is not singly a BP corporate issue.
And we also take a boat ride down France's Loire River and go fishing in Malawi. Those stories a little later, though. I'm Nathan Whitcop. Welcome to the show. Spain's new Conservative government has pledged to change environmental regulations to help spur the country's struggling economy. For the country's business sector, this makes perfect sense, but critics warn that if some of the ideas under consideration are implemented, not only could the environment suffer in the long term, so too could the economy. Guy Hedgecoe reports from Madrid.
I'm standing in Plaza de España in central Madrid, one of the city's best-known squares. Just behind me is a statue of Don Quixote on his horse, but next to me is a less visited monument, a small green metal shed in the corner of the square with an antenna sticking out of the top. This is one of the city's gauges to check the quality of the air and measure pollution. Environmentalists worry that if the government has its way, the quality of air measured at stations such as this will be badly affected. The cause of Spanish environmentalists' concern is this recent address to a congressional committee by Miguel Arias Cañete, the Minister of Agriculture and Environment in the country's new Conservative government. The minister said he plans to overhaul environmental regulations in several areas because they restrict Spain's economic growth. Spain has the industrialised world's highest jobless rate at 23% and is set to fall back into recession this year, making the economy by far the government's biggest priority. Spaniards seem to accept this, although they don't necessarily believe the environment should suffer as a result.
So maybe if we focus on innovation and if we focus on how to manage our natural resources better, the government will implement indirectly better policies.
I think a government that says that you have to get rid of the environment to grow is not telling the truth. We don't need to choose with one another.
Details of what exactly the government will do are yet to emerge, but the Environment Minister did mention over 20 areas where he believes current regulations need to be lifted or altered to help create jobs and growth. These include restrictions on development of coastal areas, water regulations and a national clean air law. The business community, which has been hard hit by the current economic crisis, has welcomed these plans with open arms.
There has been a tendency in the previous government and in other governments before that to prioritise the protection of the environment without ensuring the competitiveness of Spanish companies, especially in the difficult current situation we are in.
Rodolfo Gijón represents Spain's Confederation of Employers and Industries, and he specialises in environmental issues. Gijón says many regulations currently in place are too general. As an example, he says the environmental responsibility law means small companies can get bogged down by red tape and costs, even when their impact on the environment is minor. But environmental groups are deeply suspicious of the government plans. The quality of Spain's air is one area they fear will be affected.
This leads us to think that what is going to be is a watering down of the objectives.
Samuel Martín-Sosa is a spokesman for Spanish Green Group Environmentalists in Action. He says Spain has failed to make any real effort to meet EU clean air standards over the last decade.
So that if now presently Spain is at a structural problem complying with air quality, now almost 90% of the Spanish population is breathing polluted air, the situation is going to be even worse.
Martín-Sosa points to the fact that several Spanish cities already breach EU regulations concerning levels of particle matter and nitrogen dioxide in the air, while supporters of the government plans to revise the clean air regulations acknowledge that Spain's air is not clean enough. They blame this more on cars than industry. But beyond the specifics of the new government's plans, its insistence that environmental concerns should not shackle growth highlights the broader issue of Spain's economic model. Construction and the housing market drove Spain's decade-long economic boom, but when the property bubble burst in 2008, the building industry collapsed, taking hundreds of thousands of jobs with it. Green activists such as Martín-Sosa argue that the government's plans to loosen up environmental controls, along with an announced major road building drive for later this year, indicate that Spain is heading back to an era of unsustainability.
This economic model that they're striving for with these changes and deregulating the environmental protection is the same model that took us to the present economic and ecological crisis.
But Rodolfo Gijon of the Employers and Industries Association is adamant that a balance can be struck and that heavy restrictions on industry are not the answer.
What we need to do is to look at how all sectors can reduce their environmental impact, but not look for an economy that is based exclusively on so-called clean sectors, renewable energy and environmental consulting. Those things are very important, but a country can't live off them. We need cars, steel, cement and all those things. What we need to do is to try and make sure they have the lowest possible impact on the environment.
Spain's dramatic economic crisis has left it wondering not just how to start growing again, but how to do so in a sustainable way. The signs are that the new government is currently putting economic priorities ahead of environmental ones. Guy Hedgecoe, DW, Madrid.
Now to New Orleans, where almost 2 years after the massive oil spill that sullied the Gulf of Mexico, BP is set to face court. The federal trial was originally scheduled to start on Monday, but has been pushed back a week amid speculation that a settlement is near. Billions of dollars of damages for hundreds of plaintiffs are at stake. But on the streets of New Orleans, locals seem leery of the proceedings. Zoe Sullivan reports.
And let me take a romaine too.
At this downtown market in New Orleans, many still feel angry at BP. The trial, now scheduled to start next week, stands to be the largest private litigation in U.S. history. It rolls together 535 separate lawsuits by federal and state governments, individuals, and businesses. Few here on this busy corner expect justice. Jim Core is a farmer and a Louisiana native.
It'll be a backroom payoff. They'll buy them out. They'll get slapped on the wrist, and away we go again.
Wheeler Mormon teaches in New Orleans.
I would expect that BP is going to come out favorably. That just seems to be the way that it generally works.
The trial, which is now set to begin on the 5th of March, is meant to determine billions of dollars worth of penalties that need to be paid by BP and other companies involved in the spill. Eric Smith is the associate director of Tulane University's Energy Institute. He doubts that BP's co-defendants, Transocean and Halliburton, will be found guilty of malicious wrongdoing, but doesn't rule it out.
My guess is what he would say is that you can't indemnify yourself out from under punitive damages, which are meant to punish a company. So that if, for example, Transocean were found guilty of gross liability with malice and intent to cause harm or something like that, something I seriously doubt, but supposing something like that were to take place, then there's no indemnity provision.
The trial comes at an awkward moment for BP. It recently posted profits of $23.9 billion for 2011 and increased the dividend that it pays its stockholders by 14%. Despite these healthy figures, the firm faces as much as $40 billion in fines, according to an estimate in the New York Times. Yet some in the region say the full impact of the spill is still not clear. Cynthia Sartu is the executive director of the Gulf Restoration Network, an environmental advocacy group based in New Orleans.
We are seeing potential impacts, hundreds of dolphins dying. We're seeing reductions in fisheries. We're seeing sores on fish. And there is no concrete proof one way or the other right now, whether that's related to oil, whether it's not related to oil.
A single federal judge, Carl Barbier, is overseeing the trial with no jury. Given the enormous size of the case, Barbier has split the litigation into 3 segments. The first stage will focus on the responsibility for the blast that killed 11 rig workers and injured 16 others, rupturing the wellhead that started the spill. It sent roughly 200 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico between April and July in 2010. The next two segments of the case are to deal with the cleanup efforts and the health and environmental damages. While ordinary people worry that BP may escape with a slap on the wrist, Sartoo says the issue goes beyond any individual company.
The commissions, the President's Commission, the Coast Guard Commission, the professional societies have all found, no, this could happen again. If industry-wide practices are not addressed, if regulation is not made more stringent, this could happen again. It is not a BP, it is not singly a BP corporate issue. It is an industry-wide issue.
The U.S. Congress has been considering a bill that would allocate any fines levied as a result of the trial. The bill is called the Restore Act. The bill has received backing from environmental groups because it would direct a substantial portion of the fines to coastal restoration projects. Reports say that BP has already paid roughly $6 billion in fines to people and businesses through the Gulf Coast Claims Fund, but this money is separate from the fines that would fund the Restore Act. For DW, I'm Zoe Sullivan in New Orleans.
Coming up, a boat ride down the Loire and shrinking fish in Malawi. First, though, a quick look at some news from the past week. Here's Holly Fox.
A federal U.S. court has dismissed a lawsuit brought against the biotech giant Monsanto by organic farmers. The plaintiffs were seeking a ruling that would prohibit Monsanto from suing farmers if their organic seeds became contaminated with the company's patented products. The judge said the suit was an effort to create controversy where none existed. Monsanto is the world's largest seed company. It has a reputation for filing patent infringements against farmers who claim the company's seeds blew onto their fields. Monsanto has said it will never sue farmers over inadvertent incidents. EU politicians have backed a proposal that would allow intervention to prop up persistently low prices on the bloc's carbon market. The measure would allow the European Commission, the EU's executive, to withhold permits on the emissions trading scheme as of next year. Observers say the EU overestimated businesses' needs and allocated too many permits for the initial phase of the scheme, which flooded the market. The permits have been trading for under €10 for months. Economists say they ought to trade at double that to encourage cleaner investments. The Worldwide Fund for Nature said this week that the brown bear may have become extinct in Austria. The last bear, Moritz, could not be detected in 2011. The WWF has been trying to repopulate the northern limestone Alps with brown bears for decades. Some 35 have lived in the region, but the WWF said at least 20 were missing. The group blamed a combination of poaching, the small size of the founder population, and changing hunting quotas in Slovenia for the difficulties besetting the repopulation program. The region shares borders with Italy and Slovenia. The World Bank has announced a new partnership to confront overexploitation of the world's oceans. The alliance is to bring together existing conservation programs with governments, scientific bodies, the private sector, and green groups. The bank plans to raise at least $300 million. The money is to help finance market-based measures aimed at reflecting the true value of the ocean's benefits and encouraging long-term stewardship. A specific goal is to rebuild at least half the world's depleted fish stocks. About 85% of ocean fisheries range from depleted to fully exploited.
Holly Fox there with the Environment News. If you're looking for more environment content, head to our website. It's new. You'll also find our TV material there and projects like Global Ideas, which is all about solutions to environmental challenges. The website is dw.de/environment. The Loire is France's longest river. For centuries, the country's primary route for travel and transport from the ocean to Paris. It's often described as France's motorway of the past. The chateaux scattered throughout the valley are testimony to the river's former importance. Kings and queens were attracted to the beautiful region with its mild climate, and ordinary people also used it for fishing, hunting along the banks, and washing clothes and hides. Once the river featured a steady traffic of boats. Today, it's almost empty. One man who wants to make sure people don't forget the Loire's importance is Jean Lay. He takes people out on the water to discover the river's past and learn something about its present state. Danny Mitzman went along for a ride.
A chilly winter's afternoon. Everyone's wrapped up in hats, coats and gloves except Jean Lay himself, who seems not to even notice the biting wind as we gather speed. Dressed in jeans and an open-necked sweatshirt, he grins happily as he steers us to the middle of the river between the two banks before beginning his tales.
Qui n'est pas prévisible. L'eau, elle est montée, vous voyez là. Vous voyez où est le bateau perché? Voilà. L'eau était là il y a 5 jours. Elle est redescendue.
The river is Jean Lay's greatest passion in life. He gave up his job at a landscape school to be able to pursue life on the Loire. You can find him all year round at the mooring spot just beneath the Château de Chaumont, ready to share his love of the river with passers-by.
The idea when I founded the association was to be able to live on the river and to bring life on it, because you know there is no boats on the river now. It's finished. So now people can see boats on the river, and it's a little bit life. And a lot of people don't know the river.
Jean's boat has a flat bottom suitable for navigating over the river's sandbanks and a large square sail. It's the traditional style boat that was used on the Loire as far back as the 17th century. He's had 5 of them constructed so that with the help of volunteers in his association, you can take a trip on the Loire any day of the year.
My job is very interesting because people take conscience. This is our river, it's not my river. It's 40,000 people coming here for 10 years. I'm useful, I think. So I'm proud of what I do. Ça, cette île était arborée, il y avait des arbres il y a un mois et demi. On a prélevé beaucoup de sable après la guerre.
Without preaching, he talks about the damage to the river and its banks that overbuilding can cause, flooding and landslides, pollution and the destruction of natural animal habitats.
It's terrible because when it's spoiled, it's for a long time, for a very long time. It's really crazy. Everywhere on the world, a river is like life. For us, it's criminal when a river is damaged.
Jean tells us cautionary tales about the devastating environmental consequences of irresponsible industries.
6 months ago, we learned there is pyralène, wet metals, heavy metals in the fish. This is a poison, but a poison, it will stay 600-800 years maybe, and we can't eat anymore. It's finished.
On average, about half of Jean's tourists are from the region, 35% are from the rest of France and 15% are foreign. They usually come to explore the river's flora and fauna, admire views of the chateau and discover its cultural history. But Jean gets plenty of unusual requests too.
Et il y a même des demandes en mariage. Parce que j'ai accompagné un jeune couple et
I once took a young man out with his girlfriend, he tells me. I dropped them off on an island and waited on board while the man proposed. Couples have even got married in my boat.
C'est des mariages. On fait tout.
Dans le bateau?
Dans le bateau.
Was an incredible man. He created cruise on the Loire since 10 years now.
Samuel Buchwalder works for the Touraine-Loire Valley Tourist Board and says Jean Lay is their ideal ambassador.
He's a fan of the river. He knows everything about it. He knows how to find a beaver You know, beaver are very, very frightened, but he can swim with beaver. He can show you the plants, the special plants on the banks. Of course, he can read the weather in the sky, and he's a marvelous teller of the Loire.
Samuel says Jean is one of several locals trying to educate people about the value of their natural cultural patrimony. What he admires most in Jean's method is the creative way he teaches conservation by taking people to experience the joys the river offers.
A wine tasting on an island, for example, you can have a night on the Savage Islands. So you start at 5 p.m. and you have a cruise for 1 hour and a half. You stop on the islands, sand islands. You put tents and you spend the night with a dinner, with a fire. It's marvelous, marvelous.
Have you done it?
I've done it twice.
So it's unforgettable.
Unforgettable. If you have the chance to have a lovely sky with stars, just a little wind of spring or summer, it's unbelievable.
C'est un vin qui est naturellement tannique.
But winter trips are just as appetising, especially if you organise a cheese and wine tasting on board with local producers as you drift down the river at sunset.
Amazing. I really like it. The speech of Jean was very interesting, and the light with the sunset was very beautiful.
Oh, very enjoyable. It's great. You know, we had Loire wine and Loire goat cheese on the Loire with the producers. I think that's a fantastic moment, actually.
I think it's very nice. It gives a good picture of this river, because it's so different to be down on the level on the river instead of just looking from the streets. It's very different.
And Samuel Buchwalder says discovering the river itself is the key to getting to know the entire Loire and Touraine Valley region.
The old generation has been educated in a way the Loire was dangerous. You should stay away from the Loire because there are rapids and you can die in the Loire. And thanks to Jean, we rediscover the Loire. The new generation rediscover the Loire and how to approach the Loire Valley.
Danny Mitzman, Deutsche Welle Radio, the Loire.
The French may no longer depend so much on freshwater fish for protein, but in Malawi, the locals do. Malawi in East Africa has more than 50 kilometres of coastline, something rare for a landlocked country. It abuts Africa's third largest lake, Lake Malawi. Fish is the number one source of protein here, but for years now, fishermen have been pulling in smaller and smaller catches. Mercy Kayanga of the Malawi Broadcasting Corporation and Deutsche Welle's Matthias Berlinger wanted to find out why. Their report is presented here by Anka Raspa.
During night is when we go for fishing. I think it means they are ready to go. They do leave at 9 o'clock in the evening. They come back at 6 o'clock in the morning, yes.
At Lake Malawi, the last rays of sunshine are reflected on the water. Dusk sets in as Davison Paulos steers his boat across the smooth water near Malembo village. A group of fishermen are gathered at the beach, mending broken nets and examining the boat and its engine. Paulos and his colleagues will head out tonight to catch usipa, sardine-sized fish that Malawians like to eat dried or smoked. Scott Ledgson smokes the fish on the metal grate of a homemade grill in a straw-thatched hut.
We buy the fish right here on the beach when the boats come in. We dry it in the sun and smoke it over the fire. Sometimes it takes a day, sometimes a day and a half, depending on the amount of fish we have. When it's done, we sell the fish right here or at the next market.
Usipa fish love light. That's why it's best to catch them at night, when you can lure them using a lamp. The fishermen attract them with a paraffin lamp and pull them on board using nets. Davidson Paulos has checked all the lamps for tonight.
Yeah, we have the petrol and paraffin there. Yeah, we have already bought. The problem is that it is very expensive. The paraffin and petrol are very expensive. There's scarcity of paraffin. We don't have paraffin in any filling station. It's buy from vendors here. And some of the paraffin we are using is from Mozambique.
1,400 kwacha is approximately €7. That's less than the Malawian traders ask for, so it's worth crossing the border to Mozambique, right across the other side of the lake. Davidson Paulos used to be a school teacher, but then he contracted an eye disease and was forced to give up teaching. He applied to the African Development Bank for funding for fishing gear. 2 groups of 5 men each share a boat. Paulos heads one of the groups. Masamba Wasi, a jovial elderly man with short grey hair, heads the other.
I've worked as a fisherman for many years. I used to be employed by another boat owner where I would operate the lamps. In 2007, I got a loan, so we bought a boat, an engine, life vests, nets, lamps, and other things.
Each group received 1 million kwacha, around €5,000, that they were supposed to pay back within 3 years, with a 29% interest rate.
Some months ago, we managed to pay back 60,000 kwacha, sometimes 100,000. There's not much left for us because we're still repaying the loan. Some days we hardly earn anything at all. We should have paid everything off in June, but we didn't catch enough fish, so we still owe 500,000 kwacha.
That is €2,500. Maclean Sikweze works for CEDAM, an aid organization that manages the credit for the African Development Bank.
It happens that a month goes by without any payment, especially when it comes to those months like March, April, May, June, where there's so much coldness, which means these fish that we have now runs to deeper waters.
When the fishermen got their loans just 3 years ago, studies projected the waters at Malembo were plentiful enough to feed the fishermen and enable them to repay their loans. Philibert Chimdenga, an official with the local fishing authorities, confirms that the situation has changed over the past few years.
The research people say the fish is at the deep waters. It was overfished along with the shallow waters. So they have run to the deep waters just to hide from the fishermen.
Fish is a major source of protein for most Malawians. For generations, usipa and the larger chambo fish have been an important part of traditional cooking. But the fishermen no longer find many chambo in their nets. The government tries to protect the populations by banning chambo fishing in the breeding seasons in November and December. They've also banned the use of small mesh nets to allow the fish to grow to a certain size and age.
But you see, they are found everywhere at this time because of poor inspectorate we have, because there are very few personnel based at Namiasi. So they cover the whole lake from Mangoji to the north.
But a full net today is more important to fishermen than the long-term protection of a fish population. If a solution is not found to balance the needs of fishermen and the environment, the chambo fish might one day disappear completely from Malawi's lakes and menus.
Anka Rosper presenting that report there. And that brings us to the end of this week's show. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can always send us an email at livingplanet@dw.de. Thanks for listening. I'm Nathan Whitcomb. Bye for now.